Oh, doesn't that look good? Welcome y'all to Robyn on the Farm. Today I'm making this fresh milled flour honey oat bread. This bread is delicious. It's a sandwich bread that's soft and fluffy. It's hearty, wholesome, healthy, everything you want your sandwich bread to be. To get started on this fresh milled flour honey oat bread, I got out my Nutrimill wheat grinder back there and some hard white winter wheat berries, and I milled it up into some fresh milled flour. Now, I'm going to give you today's recipe in grams and in cups and spoons, just to make it more universal for everyone. But this is 760 grams of wheat berries milled up into 760 grams of fresh milled flour, or it was 4 cups of berries milled up into 5 3/4 cups of fresh milled flour. So I just ground this up. You want to grind your wheat right before you use it in your bread so that it has the most nutrition. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this into my mixer. This is my Bosch Universal Mixer. This thing has such a strong motor. I have used this for years and years and years, and it's made so much bread for me. I love this. I think it's just a workhorse. So I'm going to throw this into this mixer. I've already measured it out. I know exactly how much it is. I'm going to leave the recipe down in the description. Y'all can print it out. You can follow along if you want to. And our next ingredient is water. I'm going to use 580 grams or 2.5 cups of water. Now I'm going to use warm water. Think warm bath temperature water. So I'm going to throw this right into my bowl too. 580 grams or 2.5 cups warm water. Next, I want some melted butter. This is 42 grams of melted butter or 3 tablespoons. This is my really cool little melting pot. I love this. I can just throw this on a burner and it can melt my butter really quick. Way better than throwing it into the microwave where I always would make a huge mess. My butter would explode in there. So 3 tablespoons of melted butter just right on into the bowl. And next we want an egg. I'm going to use 1 egg. Now the egg is optional. You don't have to use it in your bread. Sometimes I make it with the egg and sometimes I don't, but I just like the texture better. You get a better, softer crumb when you include an egg. So I'm going to throw an egg into my mixing bowl. But like I said, it's optional. You don't have to. And our next ingredient is honey. I'm going to use this organic honey. I just got it from the grocery store. It's nothing special, but it's going to make this bread taste so good. So this is 130 grams of honey, or that's about 1/3 cup. So I'm just going to throw that right into my mixing bowl too. And this is going to be our only sweetener that we use in this bread, and it's just going to be so good. This is really good, wholesome, hearty bread. And next we want some salt. I'm going to use this Redmond's Real Salt. This is this pretty pink North American ancient fine sea salt. I'm getting pretty low on it, so I need to order some more. But I'm going to use 2 teaspoons of this salt. Now, you don't have to use this kind of salt. You can use just plain old white iodized table salt. So use what you have, but I'm going to use this salt. You can see how pretty it is. I'm just going to throw that right on in there. Next, we want some oats. I almost forgot to add these, which would be really bad because this is honey oat bread. So this is 125 grams of oats or 1 1/3 cups. These are just quick oats, but you can use rolled oats in this bread too. Like I said, this is a really good, hearty, wholesome, yummy bread, and these oats just make it so good. So I'm just gonna throw these into my mixer. Those are my Augustin Farms oats that I like to store in a big bucket. They're great. Now these are all of the ingredients that we're gonna add so far. We're not gonna add the yeast yet. We're gonna add the yeast after we autolyze the dough. I love to autolyze my dough when I make whole grain breads. It makes the biggest difference in my breads. To autolyze, we're gonna mix up this dough just for a minute and we're gonna let it sit. We're gonna let it sit anywhere from 15 minutes to 3 hours. That's kind of a big stretch, but it gives you some flexibility in your bread making. And really, I think about 45 minutes is perfect for me. So I go usually about 45 minutes to an hour. And as your dough sits, it lets those whole grains to kind of absorb some of the water, some of the liquids, and it softens the bran. And you're just gonna get such a better, softer bread with a better texture, a better crumb, softer, fluffier, all the good things. So I think autolyzing is essential, and I do it every single time I make whole grain breads. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this going. I'm just gonna let this mix, like I said, just for a minute, let all the ingredients get incorporated, and I'll show it to you then. I I just let the mixer mix up all of the ingredients except the yeast, and the dough is looking great. Now you can see that it actually looks rather wet, but this is exactly what you want it to look like going into the autolyze period, so that this dough can absorb some of the extra liquids. That'll give you the softer bran and just make your bread so much better. So I'm gonna let this sit here for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then I'm gonna add the yeast. Now it's really important not to forget to add the yeast. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my little tablespoon right here next to my mixer so I don't forget to add the yeast. And I am gonna cover it so that it doesn't dry out during this autolyze time. Now that the dough is autolyzed, it's time to add our yeast. Now whenever I autolyze my dough, I use instant yeast. And that's just because this instant yeast is gonna mix into our dough better since everything else is already incorporated together. So whenever you autolyze, I recommend using instant yeast. This is my Bellarize instant yeast. I keep my yeast in the freezer and I get it out right in time to make bread. Your yeast will stay good forever that way past the expiration date. You can just get it out and use it right away. You don't have to let it come to room temperature or anything like that. So I'm gonna use 1 tablespoon of this instant yeast. I'm just gonna sprinkle it onto my dough. Now is the time to knead. I'm gonna go ahead and put the top back on my mixer, and I'm gonna let this dough knead for anywhere from 10 minutes to 20 minutes. I'm trying to get a window pane. Now a window pane is after your gluten has fully developed, you can stretch your dough and you can see through your dough. So that's a window pane. I am gonna go ahead and get this started, and when I get there, I will show you. But just plan on it taking anywhere from 10 minutes, even up to 25 minutes, just depending on your mixer. But I will show you exactly what it should look like. So I'm gonna get this going. I'm gonna let this go for about 10 minutes, and then I'm gonna check on it. All right, my dough has been kneading for exactly 10 minutes, and I'm gonna check on it and see if I get a window pane. See if I can do this one-handed. I'm gonna pull a little bit of this dough up, and I wanna get kind of a thin piece. Let's see. Now I'm gonna pull it and see if I can see through it without it breaking. Okay, I kind of can, but it still broke. So that lets me know I need to go a little bit longer to a window pane. So I'm gonna turn this back on. I'm gonna let it go for about 2 more minutes and recheck it. Okay, I let my dough go for 2 more minutes. So it's been kneading for 12 minutes total in my Bosch. And now I'm gonna check for window pane again. My dough has totally changed in texture and appearance. So hopefully I have a window pane now. All right, so you wanna grab a little bit of dough and you wanna pull it very, very, very gently. And you wanna get kind of a thin piece and pull it up and see if you can see through it like a window pane without it breaking really easily. And I can see light through my dough. So that lets me know that that's window pane and the gluten has developed really, really well. And now it's time to let the dough rise. So I'm gonna go ahead and get it out of my mixer. Now you can leave your dough in your mixer if you wanna just let it rise in your mixer, that's totally fine. I'm gonna go ahead and get it out and put it in this bowl, and I kinda wanted to look at the dough. So check out our ball of dough. It is tacky, but it's not sticky, so it's not too wet. It's definitely not too dry. This is a really great ball of dough, and this is gonna make some great bread. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this into this big bowl, and I'm gonna cover it with a warm, wet tea towel, and I'm gonna let this dough rise anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. And I want it to expand. I want it to about double in size. But it all depends on the temperature of your home, if it's winter, if it's summer. All of those play a factor in how long it's gonna take to rise. But I usually plan on checking it in about an hour, and I will show it to you at that point. I've let my dough rise for about an hour and a half on the countertop, and it's time to check it out. Oh, look at this dough. Look how well it rose. Doesn't that look good? That's exactly what you want your dough to look like when it's done rising. So this is the hard part. I hate doing this. I'm gonna punch down my dough. Okay, so I'm just gonna take my fist and I'm gonna punch down my dough, which I hate doing because it looks so pretty when it's all risen. But I'm gonna punch it down, and then I'm just gonna turn it out from my bowl. And I'm gonna use this dough mat. And then I just know that it's nice and clean. There's nothing gross on my countertop to get into my bread. Okay, so I'm gonna take all this dough and I'm gonna divide it in half. So I'm gonna use my little bench scrape tool, and I'm just gonna eyeball it. You can use your kitchen scale if you want it two perfectly even loaves of bread. I'm gonna take this dough and I'm just gonna press it out. So I'm gonna press it out, press it out. You want it to be about as wide as your loaf pan is long. So these are my cast iron loaf pans. I love my cast iron loaf pans. They don't have any of those coatings or chemicals to get into our foods, and they just bake your bread just perfectly. So I love these cast iron loaf pans. So now that my bread is all pressed out, I'm gonna go ahead and just roll it into a loaf. So I'm just gonna take this, and you just wanna roll it nice and tight. It'll give you really good surface tension. This is gonna give you a really pretty loaf of bread. So roll it up, flip it over, pinch the seams together so that it doesn't burst in the oven. I'm gonna flip it back over, get those ends pinched together really nicely. Now that I have it shaped really well and all the seams are pinched together, I'm gonna go ahead and throw this on my countertop a few times and then pat it out. This just lets your dough to relax and it'll give you a really nice crumb and texture inside of your bread. Okay, this looks great. Now I'm gonna go ahead and throw it into my loaf pan. I poured about a tablespoon of oil into my loaf pan and I just rubbed it all around with a paper towel, and this will just let your bread just slide right on out when it's done baking. So I'm just gonna throw this loaf into the loaf pan, and now I'm gonna let it rise. I'm gonna go ahead and shape my other loaf. I'm gonna do the exact same thing. I'm just gonna press it out. Then I'm gonna just roll it up into a nice log shape. There's lots of different ways you can roll up your loaf, but it really doesn't have to be that complicated. So sometimes I'll do the head down, shoulders in method. Sometimes I'll just roll it up into a log, and it works fine either way. So get it into a nice loaf size, pinch the seams, go ahead and throw it onto your countertop a few times, pat it out, make sure it's about the right size for your loaf pan, and then just throw it on in there. Now that the dough is in the loaf pans, I'm gonna go ahead and let these rise one more time. I'm gonna let these rise, it's usually about 45 minutes to an hour, and I just want the dough to be peeking over the edge of the loaf pan. So in about 30 minutes, I'm gonna go ahead and preheat my oven to 350 degrees, and I'm just gonna let these rise on the countertop. I'm gonna check them in about 45 minutes, so I'll show them to you then. I am gonna go ahead and cover these up with some plastic wrap so that they don't dry out while they're rising. You can see our fresh milled flour honey oat bread has risen in the loaf pans. Look how good that looks. It rose for about 45 minutes and it's ready to go into the oven. I'm gonna dress them up a little bit. I'm gonna give them an egg wash and add some oats on top, and then I'll throw them in the oven. I'm gonna do an egg wash. This is just one whole egg and a teaspoon of water. And I'm gonna take this basting brush and very, very, very gently and lightly, I'm just gonna brush some of this egg wash on the top of this dough. You definitely don't want to press down too much so that you don't let your dough collapse. But I'm just going to put a little bit of this on there. This is going to give it a really nice shine. And I'm also going to add some oats. I have some rolled oats here. I'm just going to kind of sprinkle these on top. And this egg wash is going to help the oats to stick. Okay, now that those are on there, and those are totally optional, you do not have to do this at all, but those look nice like that. Now I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. I'm just gonna throw these in there and I'm gonna let them bake for about 35 to 40 minutes. I'll show them to you when it's time to get them out. Our fresh milled flour honey oat bread is fresh out of the oven. Look how good this bread looks. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this loaf out of the loaf pan. The tricky part is not letting all of the oats fall off the top. So let me see if I can kind of pull it out. There we go. See, isn't that so nice? It just came right out of the cast iron loaf pan because I oiled it up. I did let this bake for about 35 minutes at 350 degrees. So this is what I'm gonna do. I really wanna cut into it, but I'm gonna let it cool just for a few minutes. That'll just give you a better crumb, better texture to your bread. So I like to cover it up with a dry tea towel, and I like just kind of that warmth and condensation just to kind of give me a nice soft crust. So I'm just gonna let this sit here for maybe 10 minutes, and then I am gonna go ahead and cut into it, and we will check out the inside. I'm ready to cut into our fresh milled flour honey oat bread. I wanted you to get a good look at this bread. Doesn't this look so yummy? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and cut into it. It is still warm. Now, if you want the very best texture and crumb out of your bread, you wait a little bit longer to cut it, but I can't do that. My home smells so good because of this bread, and I want to eat it. Look how good that crumb looks. This looks fantastic. For fresh milled flour bread that has no unhealthy white flour in it, oh my goodness, this looks so good. It is really soft and light and fluffy. I don't want to squish it too much, but it's super squishy. Great for sandwiches. Cut another little piece. There we go. Oh, doesn't that look good? Okay, I'm gonna take a little bite of the heel because that is my favorite part. It's divine. It's so good. You can just eat this with a little bit of butter and honey, and just have a meal out of this. I'll leave the printable recipe for this fresh milled flour honey oat bread down in the description, and I'll also leave the links for some of my other fresh milled flour recipes that you might like. Thank you so much for being here with me on Robyn on the Farm. I will see you next time.
Robyn's in the kitchen, dough beneath her hands, wheat from the fields and eggs from her land. Sunlight through the window, a warm golden glow. She's working hard to make that dough.